All right. Hi, Dad.
Hi, Michael.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for taking some time to answer some cool questions about your life.
And thank you for driving all the way down here.
Love to.
You and Zuzu.
Yes. So thought maybe we could start off with a question about where you were born and where you grew up and your parents.
All right. I was born in Philadelphia and in a hospital actually in downtown Philly called Hahnemann Hospital, which I think is still there, on March 18, 1932, the day after St. Patty's Day. And my father's name was Thomas, and so they named me Thomas Patrick. He was Thomas Francis, and my grandfather was Thomas. So, anyway, uh,
Got a few Thomases there.
yes, yeah.
And how about your mom?
My mom was Bridget O'Donnell and grew up in Ireland. She was from a community called Donegal, or a part of Ireland called Donegal, and lived in a small town to the north and west of Ireland. And the home that she was born and raised in is still there. The farm is still owned by the O'Donnells,
Wow.
and it was a dairy farm when my mother was a child, when they raised cows for their milk. And in 1940, at the time of the war, the Second World War, they switched from raising the cows for their milk, they raised them for their calves.
Mm.
And that's what they do today still.
And so that's the O'Donnell name.
That's the O'Donnell name.
Oh, that's great. And it's in County Donegal?
It's in County Donegal.
Excellent. And how about your father? Which county was he
He's
from?
from Galway.
Galway, okay. And is there a particular city or do you know?
Yeah, it's like Garabunde
Oh, okay.
is the name of the city. And when we visited it in '96, the house that he grew up in was still there but not used. Uh, when his mother died, she was the remaining person, and when she died in 1948, he and his two brothers were the only survivors of that family, and they sold the farm to another person called Michael Lydon. And at the time I brought it up, and that was a relative or something, and he said no, it wasn't at all. So when we went both in '79 and again in '96, I met with Michael and talked to him, and he had a sister that lived kind of around the corner and down the road.
Wow.
And so she invited your mom and I in for tea, uh, and scone or whatever at the time. So yeah,
Wow. So they probably still have it today?
I would guess. I
Yeah.
have no idea. I think Michael has since died, and probably she too. They weren't kids when we were there, and so yeah.
Got it. And tell me a little bit about when did your mom and dad come over from Ireland to the Pennsylvania?
Well, uh, I would say around 1923, 1924 is when they immigrated. I have uh, papers. I have my father's citizenship papers, and also my mother's. So it's on there when they immigrated. I know my mother has popped up because she came through a place called Ellis Island in New York.
Mm.
which is where all ships from overseas would land and go through customs or whatever. And so my mother, records show that she went through there.
Oh, got it. And she probably sailed out of Belfast, if I had to guess.
I know my dad came out of Cork,
Yeah. Okay.
and so I don't know about my mom. You're right; she could have gone across, but it that was during the Troubles times, the real trouble times, because that's about the time that Ireland got split into two pieces, and so I don't know, to be honest.
Wow. And how did your parents meet?
Probably through their work. My dad was a chauffeur, and my mother was a nanny, and I would guess that they would have met through a working. I know that they were working for a family in Philadelphia at the time of their marriage, so I'm guessing that.
Okay. And they started dating, and next thing we know is
Who knows?
yeah.
Who knows?
Oh, that's great. So, switching gears a little bit, I wanted to ask you a question about mom,
Well,
and tell me a story about when you and mom met.
ah, well, we were here in San Diego, of all places we met. And yet, I was here in the Navy. I had just in the process of finishing my cruise with the Navy, and your mom came out to look for work here in San Diego because she was troubled with asthma from when she was around 9 years old, childhood. And so people told her that the climate would be better for her here. So she came out with that in mind. Via kind of she flew first into Burbank and then from Burbank she went to Phoenix, and from Phoenix she came to San Diego via friends. Go see this person, go see that person. So anyway, and I was stationed here on a ship, and I would stay overnight sometimes when I had a weekend off. I wouldn't go back to the ship. I would just stay here in the YMCA, and they would let us stay there for 50 cents a night. And so I would go to the Catholic Church, which was really the cathedral in downtown San Diego, St. Joseph's, and they had a youth group of young men and women, 18 to maybe 30 years of age, that were all single, and they would get together every Friday night for a dance. And as part of that group, they also did social things. They would go skiing, go to the beach parties, etc., as just young Catholic men and women. And so I went this Friday night, April the 17th, 1953. I had just been transferred off my ship to the naval station because the ship was getting ready to go to Alaska, and I wasn't. My enlistment would expire when I was in Alaska, and I told them I wasn't planning to re-enlist, so they sent me off to the shore station to get reassigned. So I went to the dance that night to kind of give the laugh to all the guys that are staying behind while I'm going home or going somewhere. And the decision was made I was going home. They were going to discharge me because my enlistment was up the 1st of August, and this was mid-April. Uh, so, uh, as part of the ritual at the dance, they had chairs set up and had kind of a meeting before the dance, and the dance was records, uh, and so they talked about what they were going to do for partying, going to the beach, or whatever they were going to be planning to do. And as part of the ritual, they asked anybody that was new to stand up and introduce themselves. And so this girl stood up and said that she was Dorothy Haggerty and she was there from Philadelphia. And I thought, wow, that's where I'm going back to. So I'll have to dance with her. So we danced, and we just kept dancing. We never separated once we started, and chatted and danced and so forth. Then they took a break and had soft drinks and coffee and tea and some kind of cupcakes or whatever, sweets. So we did that, and Dorothy went off to the bathroom. So she came back, and out of the blue, she says to me, "Is your dad a chauffeur?" And I'm thinking, yes, well, yes, he was. But how would she know that question? Or why would she ask that question? So I said, yeah. And so she said, well, did he know Dennis Haggerty? She said, that's my dad. I said, no, but I said, he used to work with Pat Haggerty. She says, that's my uncle. And so that began a 5-day kind of sojourn. We finished up the dance, and I took her home. She had rented a room with a nurse at Mercy Hospital, and that she had been referred to. And so I took her home, and then I met her the next morning, and we went downtown and went to lunch, and eventually we went to a movie, and the next day and so on. I think I had to stay on the base on Monday, and then we spent Tuesday together, and then Wednesday is when I was catching the train to go home, and it was a 7 a.m. train, and so she came down to the station to say goodbye to me, and the guys were saying I wouldn't leave that. You're nuts. But anyway, I left, and then we continued to write, and she stayed for probably about 4 or 5 weeks into May, and then she couldn't find work here, because she worked in department stores in credit and collection in Philly, and she couldn't get employment here because she couldn't speak Spanish, and so she had exhausted her funds and caught the train and came home.
Got it. And then you guys reconnected?
And we reconnected. And at the time, I was living with my parents in Germantown, and she was moved back in with her parents in West Philly.
Wow. And then continued to date.
And we continued to date. It was a long haul between places.
Yeah, I'll say.
It was between West Philly and Germantown was probably a good half-hour drive.
Wow. Okay. Now, how long did you guys date before you?
Well, we started in May of 1953, and we dated till we got married in June of 54.
Okay.
And in the meantime, I wanted to go to school, and so I enrolled in classes in math at Temple University. They had a night school, so I had a job in the daytime, and at nighttime I would go to these classes, and I just took algebra and two years of algebra, two what would be high school years of algebra, and 1 year at trig. And because I knew I wanted to be an engineer, and that I knew that math was important, that I didn't have junior algebra or trig in previous in high school, so I felt I should get those.
Oh, that's great. And that was the prerequisites you needed for Drexel?
Yeah, I don't know if it really was. If they ever said anything to me, it's just I knew I needed math,
Yeah.
and I needed to get it strengthened.
Oh, that's neat. Well, kind of sidetracking a little bit, maybe. How about in the Navy? I would love to hear maybe one of your favorite stories from when you were in the Navy.
I don't know what to make of that one.
Yeah.
It,
Were you in you were in Korea, in the waters in Korea, like during the war?
yes, yeah, yeah. Well, there's a story there. Um, I was on this little ship that was created in the Second World War. It was what they called an LCI, and later the Navy changed it to, that stood for Landing Craft Infantry. Later they changed it to LSIL, Landing Ship Infantry Large. Yeah, now large is 150 feet long and 26 feet wide. That's not what you would think of as large, but anyway, and it was used to land a company of soldiers or Marines on the beach. It could ride up, it ran up on the beach and grounded itself. And on the way in, it would drop an anchor off the back of the ship. And then once the military got unloaded, then they'd pull on the anchor and pull themselves back off the beach and go back out. So in my time, when I got on the ship, it was in Guam, and this was in April of 1950. I had been to boot camp for 3 months, and then I went to engineman school for 3 months, and then went by ship from San Francisco to Guam. So I got aboard the ship. So then the Korean War started in June. I started in April, and in June the Korean War started. And then the Navy, prior to that, was going to get rid of the ship. They were going to typically decommission it and sell it. So they made a decision that instead they were going to turn it into a floating laboratory for medical epidemic control to use it down in the South Pacific for where diseases would pop up on an island. They could bring this little ship in with its doctors and labs and everything. So they sent us to Japan to get converted at a Japanese shipyard and get converted from what it was to this laboratory, etc. So we were there from beginning of October, till beginning of February the next year. So whatever that 4 or 5 months that they did the conversion and everything. And so then we got sent to Korea. And when we arrived in Korea, there was a war going on between the North and the South, and the American soldiers and Marines were all fighting in it. Unbeknownst to people like me, there was a concern that the Chinese had entered into the war and in support of the North Koreans. And so, but the word had come that some of the Chinese were suffering from bubonic and dying from bubonic plague, which was a big disaster. So the government didn't inoculate us for bubonic plague. We got a lot of shots, but not that. So they needed to know, was that true or not true? And so spies had told them that there were bodies buried in North Korea that were dead of bubonic plague. So they put together a group of 6 or 7 I guess military guys, Navy, most of them Navy, I think all of them Navy, and an Army doctor, a brigadier general, which is high up in the military. I mean, it's like 4th down from the top general. And so he was an MD, and he was experiencing bubonic plague. So the decision was made to take our ship, put them on it, because we had the labs, and the purpose was they were going to go retrieve these bodies, bring them back to the ship, autopsy them, and know for sure whether that was bubonic plague or not. So we left the harbor in the beginning of March of 1951, and sailed north to Wonsan Harbor, which was in North Korea. And at the time, it was a big harbor. We had 4 destroyers in that harbor because Wonsan town was a railroad hub, and they wanted to disrupt railroad traffic to the south so that they couldn't reinforce, the Chinese or the North Koreans couldn't reinforce their troops. So these destroyers were sitting in the harbor just firing shells one after the other. They just rotate, and they just kept firing at them. And then sometimes they'd bring in bigger battleships and cruisers, big ships, and they'd sit outside the harbor and throw in big rockets at them and blow them up. Anyway, we got to the harbor. It was an overnight trip, and we got there, and then they transferred them the next evening to a boat to sneak ashore. And they had these 6 guys that were like Navy SEALs would be today, or Army Rangers kind of guys. And they all went in this boat with the doctor and went ashore. And then they spent the night there. And then I think, I don't know whether it was 1 night or 2 nights, but then they came back. And the doctor had determined that these bodies or persons had not died from bubonic plague, so they didn't bother to bring the bodies back. And they just, so they got back on our ship, got off the little boat, got back on our ship, and we headed back to South Korea. So that was my big war experience.
Wow. I've never heard that story.
Yeah.
So originally they thought the bodies had bubonic plague, but they had to verify it, and the verification proved that they didn't.
Yeah, because he was an expert in it, I guess he could recognize it. But in the meantime, us on the ship all got bubonic plague shots. And it was a 2-shotter deal. You got one, and then a week later you get another one.
Well, I'm curious how the senior leader ended up getting bubonic plague. That you mentioned that did get it.
I'm sorry.
Didn't someone test positive for it?
No,
Okay, got it. So no cases of
no
it.
cases.
Wonderful. That's an interesting story.
All right.
GoPro, stop recording.
And at the time, women went went to the hospital to have babies. They stayed for 2 weeks. They didn't let them go home. And so I ended up being, because my dad had to work, I ended up staying with my mother's uncle and aunt, and they had two daughters. And so I stayed, and a son, and I stayed with them for the 2 weeks. So I remember being brought home from that and meeting up with Peggy being brought home from the hospital, etc., on that house on Johnson Street. Then, somehow we got from there back to Montana Street. And these were all rentals. And so they rented a house at 71 East Montana Street. And that's where I went from then till I went in the Navy at 17 years of age. So
Wow.
so that was from around 5-ish to 17. At the time, we had other kids living on the street, but I had a friend up the street, Jim McFarland, and Jimmy and I were, joined at the hip. He had no siblings. I had Peggy, and so forth. And he was older than me by a year. So he got lined up to go to first grade. There was no kindergarten, no preschool, none of that stuff. You just started first grade when you were 6. Well, Jim was starting first grade, and I was only 5.5, and so my mother went down to talk to the nuns. This was a Catholic school, and my mother went down and talked to the nuns about letting me come to first grade with Jim, because I was heartbroken, and so forth. So the nun agreed to take me in, but on the understanding that I probably wouldn't get promoted, that I would probably get left behind. And so my mother said, I don't care, let's make it happen. So I started first grade, and in those days, you went you in first grade you went to confession for the first time. You made your first communion at the time, and so when it came time for that to happen, they didn't let me do that. They kept me back from it. I was too young or whatever. Of course, by then I had turned to be 6. And so at the end of the school year, I got promoted.
Oh.
And I kept getting promoted. I never got left down.
I was not expecting to hear that.
Yeah, so then the second grade, then I got to make my first communion and my first confession with the first graders.
Mm-hmm.
So the nuns made it all happen. That was
caught up.
yeah. And then in 3rd and 4th grade, they had confirmation. They do 2 classes at a time.
That's early.
And yeah, all that's changed. But yeah.
Wow. Well,
Anyway, Montana Street was a great street. Yeah.
Longest run too.
Yeah, longest run. We had a lot of the older young men joined the military during the war. I mean, the son of the man next to us. On one side, his son was in the army. The other one had a son in the army, and etc. So yeah, and that the man living next to me, it was a retired police officer who had gotten shot in the leg and lost his leg with the police. So
Wow. So you, how old were you when you lost your mom and your dad? And was it
they were a year apart.
relatively close? Okay.
Yeah.
You were out. You were out of the Navy at that point.
Oh yeah. I actually, Mark had Tom had been born in '55, Terry in '58, Mark in March of '59, and at the time, my dad was working for a family that went to Texas every winter. She owned, she was a very wealthy woman and owned a big ranch in Texas. The ranch is still there, and so she went down every 1st of January to do the taxes, the management of this ranch because they raised cattle. They had oil wells on the property, etc. So my dad would drive down with the limousine, and then they would settle into San Antonio, and they would stay there till sometime in March when the bookwork got done, and then they'd head back. I think also they were avoiding the winter.
Yeah.
Because they were way down on the Mexican border in the what would that be, southeastern portion of Texas. So and we didn't have cell phones, so they didn't have a lot of communication. So when Mark was born, my father would reach my mother, and she informed them that he had another grandson. His comment was, "What the hell's with this hospital? Don't they have any girls?" And this is from a guy that had all brothers.
Oh wow.
So anyway, he came home, drove home on that trip, and so forth, and then during the month. I had gotten new glasses, or I went to an optometrist to get glasses renewed, and the guy measured my eyes and so forth and told me they'd be ready in like 3 weeks. And so then my dad said to me, "Gee, I'm having trouble reading. Who'd you go to? So, and what do you think of him?" I told him, where he was and so forth. He said, "Okay, fine." So he went there, and so we talked later, and he said, "I'm getting my glasses in a week." So when I go back and see the optometrist after this, I said, "How come he gets this in a week and I gotta wait 3 weeks?" And the optometrist said, "Oh, his eyesight was really bad. He needed them." So I said, "Oh, okay." Well, unfortunately, well, it didn't matter much, but my thinking is if he had gone to an ophthalmologist, they might have determined that he actually had a brain cancer at that moment, and it was pressing on the optical nerve. Nobody knew that, and so forth. So later that month of March, one morning he got up and he couldn't button his shirt or his cuffs, because he wore a white shirt and a tie. And so he had to get my mother to do that. And it had to be, it was a Wednesday because the women, society women, would go into the downtown Philadelphia for concerts on Wednesdays. They had matinees on Wednesdays. So my father had taken her, Mrs. Alexander, into the concert and then they would go. The automobile club had a big garage there, and they had a room for the chauffeurs to come and sit and relax, and they could get coffee or whatever. And so he went there, and he picked up Mrs. Alexander after the concert or after the show, and on the drive home, she had him stop at the hospital because whatever she saw, I never did find out. Whatever she saw, he was having health issues. So she had him stop at the hospital and leave her.
There we go.
We're back in action.
Back in action.
They released you, huh?
All right.
Hey. Hello there.
What?
Cash.
I think we got to the point where my dad
There.
ended up being dropped off at the hospital by his
Cash, stop it.
employer.
Stop. No.
And-
Be nice. Cash, stop it.
His employer, Mrs. Alexander, was quite wealthy, and so she told the hospital to send her all the bills associated with my dad. But because of the fact that she was who she was, I think he got better medical care at the hospital. And so he was examined, and they were feeling that he had a stroke on the right side of his brain because it was affecting his ability to speak. And also he had, left side of his brain because it affected his speech, and it also affected the right side of his body. Was more or less paralyzed. Anyway, he was there for a couple of days, and different people tested him. And my sister Peggy, at the time, was an RN, and so she would go in. She was working as a nurse somewhere else, and she would go in, take my mother in the evenings, and then she'd go into the nurse's station and read what the doctors were writing in his chart, because the nurses gave her that privilege. And she noticed that in that, one of the doctors, a female, had said that, "I don't think this is a stroke, I think this is a tumor." But because women doctors were not very well respected by the male counterparts back in 1959, they ignored what she was saying. Peggy went in the next day and jumped all over the doctors about, "Why aren't you following up on this doctor's diagnosis? At least see if what she says is right." So they did, and they determined that he had a tumor of the brain, in the brain, called a glioblastoma. They performed surgery, and the surgeon came out and talked to us and said that he got most of the tumor, but he could never get it all. But basically, my father never recovered from that. And this was early April, and he lasted till June 8th. And then he succumbed. He never left the hospital, never could talk. But I would go there, and they wouldn't let me bring in Terry, and it wouldn't let me bring in the three boys, Tom, Terry, and Mark. But I could get him to the window, and he could see him, and I actually saw tears coming out of his eyes that I so I think he recognized them and saw them. So anyway, that's at the time he had been born in 1904, so he was about almost 55. His birthday was in September.
Wow.
So he died quite young.
Wow. And your mom was probably devastated.
My mom was devastated. He was interned at a Holy Sepulchre Cemetery in Philadelphia, Mount Airy. And my mother, I guess unbeknownst to me, was going out there every Sunday to the cemetery to bring flowers or pray or talk to him or whatever it was she was doing. So she was pretty much under the weather mentally or whatever. Her story was one of a woman. She worked in a job she had started in the early 40s when she started to work outside of the home when both Peggy and I were in school. She got a job working from the noon shift at a very exclusive men's restaurant in downtown Philly called the Racket Club. This was for the high achievers, the mayor, the judges, congressmen, all would go to this male-only restaurant to have lunch, and etc. Women were allowed to come as guests for dinner or other social things. There was a sister version of that in New York City, also called the Racket Club. Anyway, my mom could leave the house at 9 a.m, use the public transit. She'd get to work. She'd work through lunch at what they called the lunch bar, which they would order sandwiches, salads, that kind of stuff, and get it made. She would then finish up and be home by 3 by the time we got home from school. So basically she was only gone when we were in school. Of course, the summer was, she worked all summers. Anyway, she did that up until the day she was coming home from work on the train. And this train was a Reading Railroad, and it had got electric from a wire overhead, and it had a thing they called a pantograph that reached up and touched the wire to get the electricity to go down to the motors in the train. And it went through a park area in Philadelphia, in probably be part of Germantown, and right next to it was a park, and it had a small brick wall that was there, made out of natural bricks, kind of interesting scenery. Anyway, kids found that if they could stand on the park side of the wall, they would get first they would go over the wall and go down to the railroad tracks and get rocks, the stones that were the bed of the track. They'd bring them back over the wall, and then they'd throw the stones at the pantograph, and if it very sensitive to things, and if it felt if one of them hit it, it would come down off of the wire, and in doing so, it would create an arc. And so that was, 12, 13, 14-year-olds' entertainment. In this particular case, the young boys that threw it, they threw it in an arc, and because they wanted to come down on top of the pantograph. It arced, but it missed the target. It came down, and it hit the window, of the train she was riding in, broke the window, and a piece of the glass from the window went into her neck and cut her jugular vein. She didn't probably live 5 minutes. And ironically, her passenger next to her was a medical student. And even with whatever knowledge he had, he couldn't save her. So,
Oh, that's tragic.
yeah, it was tragic in a sense that yes, she lost her life, and again, she had been born in 1901, and this was 60, so she had just turned 59 or 50, whatever the math is. I've lost it.
Yeah.
But she had been around 55, 56 years of age when she died.
So young.
Too young. And, her sisters lived into their 90s. Her brother, James, he lived up until about 98, 99, and having born in 1917. So they all lived long lives, etc. The boys were caught, and I refused, and Peggy refused to prosecute them. We just felt that this was innocent child play. They made the rocks available for them, and it's just a thing of curiosity. So I didn't see any sense in punishing them. I don't know whatever happened to them, because they were like 12 or 13 at the time. Their parents did, the mothers did come with them and visited my wife, Dorothy, a night that I happened to be at school, so I never got to meet them. But anyway.
Wow. It's too early.
Yeah, exactly.
And your mom got some time with the grandkids, with Tom, Terry, and Mark.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
she loved being a grandma.
Yeah, that's so true.
Yeah, wow.
She tried bribing them, Tom in particular. She wanted Tom to come when he was an only child. She wanted him to come stay with her.
Oh, tell me that story.
And so she was trying to get him to come and spend the night with her. And so she offered him a red wagon if he would, he would come and stay. And Tom was having no parts of this. He was not going to go stay with Grandma.
Not even for a red wagon?
Not even for a red wagon.
Okay.
But in the end, he got the wagon anyway.
Oh, he got it.
She wasn't totally up to bribing, but yeah.
Wow.
But she would get Dot's sister Eileen. She would get her to come and spend the night with her.
Oh, perfect.
And because Mom was the oldest of the O'Donnells, so she was very motherly.
Okay, so I'm gonna jump around a little bit on you, and I have a question about you as an adult or as a dad. What is your very first haircut story? No, sorry, this was you as a kid. Your first haircut story.
Oh, me getting a haircut?
Because I also want to know about when you gave the boys haircuts. But let's start with you getting a haircut, because I think you had pretty long hair, right? As a as a little boy.
Yeah, I was about 2, and I had long blonde hair down to my shoulders, of which there's a picture around. And the problem is that I was identifying as a girl, and so anyway, this my father would be out with me, and everybody would, or people would comment, "What a beautiful daughter you have," which didn't sit too well. So he basically told my mom, "You got to get his hair cut." So she took me on a trolley car to downtown Germantown, and took me into the photographers, the professional photographers, and got my picture taken. And then got right next door was the barbershop. And so I got my hair cut.
That's the famous photo.
That's the famous photo. Now, most of the trolley cars had a driver and a conductor. The conductor sat halfway back in the car and collected fares. Before you got on in the front, you got off in the middle. And the conductor was just before the middle, so he collected the fare as you were getting off. And most of them were Irishmen. So on the way down, my mom saw them, and they made some comment or whatever. And on the way back, as luck would have it, she got the same trolley car people. And they immediately wondered, what the hell happened to the beautiful girl she just went down with? But yeah, that was the haircut.
Where did she go?
Where did she go? Where did the blonde go?
Oh, that's great. I love that picture. My sister Michelle was very curious about things that were delivered to your house when you were young. You know, things like ice or anything else, things that we don't normally see anymore unless we do DoorDash or something like that.
Yeah. Well, everything was basically delivered. The newspaper was delivered by a delivery person, and at I don't know, 12 or 13, I was a paper boy, but also the milk came via delivery man. People got ice because we didn't have electric refrigerators. We had ice-a-box.
What's an ice box?
This was basically a refrigerator that was mechanical in the sense that it was just a box with insulation that you had a section you could stick a block ice in.
Wow.
And most houses had an ice pick. So if you wanted ice for your drink, you just chip away at the block,
Wow.
put it in your drink, and so forth. In our house, you would have to collect the ice would melt, so you had to have a pan under it to collect it. In our house, we had a shed in the back that was not insulated, and we put the ice box out there so that in the winter, Mother Nature would help keep it cold. And summer, it was summer, you just had to do it. So they ingeniously just cut a small hole in the floor under the ice box and let the water just drip out on the pavement, and that was it.
Now, how about the milk? Like, would the milk just be like regular milk, or was there layers of different types of milk on the milk?
Well, originally, the milk came in layers. You had cream on the top, and then the milk was underneath it. Sometime in the 30s, early 40s, they went to what they called homogenized milk, so that the stores would, or the dairy would blend the cream and the milk together. So what you drink today is homogenized milk. So there is no, but in before that, my mother would take off some of the cream off the top of the milk and put it in a pitcher, and that was for their tea.
No.
So
That's their half and half.
that was their half and half.
Wow.
But another thing is that most of the deliveries were made via horse-drawn carts as opposed to cars. And the interesting phenomenon of that is the horses knew the route. And so the milkman would get out with and put so many bottles in his little hand carrier, and then the horse would walk on to the next stop
Oh, wow.
and meet him at the next stop, and then he'd get some more and go on and on. During the winter, they would put chains on the horse's feet so that they would be able to maneuver in the snow and the ice on the streets and keep going.
Okay. Good stuff. How about some memories when your kids were young? And then you could add in like some favorite family vacations in there too.
Yeah. Well, I was a busy man between working and going to school and basically doing homework. I kind of got it around. School was a situation. I went 3 nights a week, but I went a separate class each night. So I went to classes weekly. So then that left me the weekend, and specifically Sunday, to do homework. And so I would start after church, and Dot and the kids would get down for their naps, and because they were little, and I could go in my room and do my homework or assignments. For vacations, we like to go to the beach, and we had a spot we would go. It varied. When first year or two, when Terry and Tom were little, we went to Atlantic City, and more specifically, probably a community called Margate, which is in the south end of Atlantic City. And then after that, and that was a boarding house. So we had a bedroom in a house with 2 kids and kitchen privileges and so forth. And they were the Gallaghers, Neil and I don't remember what her first name was, but anyway. Ironic, I met them through my mother, because that's where my mother used to take Peggy and I to Mrs. Gallagher's once for a week every summer. And so after that, we went to other beach community, kind of out of the way. There was more popular ones like Wildwood, Ocean City, etc. We had one, I can't remember the name of it. If I looked on a map, I could probably figure it out. But we had a place we would go there.
Yeah, and I feel like you always made family vacations a priority. Like I have so many fond memories of Crater Lake or Lake Arrowhead, going to the beach, Carpinteria for a whole summer.
Yeah.
Like some incredible. It's probably hard to pick a favorite out of all the years of great vacations, but I know as being your son, the experiences part of our vacations was just so powerful. Tell me about Arrowhead. Do you remember the Arrowhead trip at all?
Yeah.
That was fun. It seemed like we had all of us were together, because that wasn't always the case. It's a big gap
Right.
in our years. All of us were there, and that was fun.
Right. Yeah. I forgot there was something about that. Was that the end of, and then we were moving back east. Seemed to me that one of those vacations to Arrowhead was like goodbye to California routine.
I don't think it was that one. This one, Arrowhead had a funny, a funny story because we rented a boat. Remember, we all went out on the boat, and I think we came back and the house was robbed. The house got robbed or something.
Right. Yeah.
But at least we were all safe.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. We had another one along that same line. We went up one weekend to find a place prior to the vacation, and on the way back, there was a rock laying in the roadway, and instead of trying to go around it, I figured we had enough clearance to go over it, which was wrong, and I ripped out I don't know whether I got the oil pan or the transmission oil pan, but I blew up an engine, and it was a rental car. It was a company car, which.
Right. Well, if you still have some energy, I would love to hear some stories funny stories about Mom. If you have some you'd like to share.
That's a good question. It certainly was a ball of energy.
Mom used to say, good things come in small packages.
Right.
Like diamonds and hand grenades.
Yeah. Well, I don't know, over time, she got into some hilarious different things that got herself into predicaments that they don't all come to mind at this point in time, but she was a great joy to live with. I miss her tremendously, and I was lucky guy that found her, and to be smart enough to get her to be my partner. And she truly was a partner.
She was a great partner. You guys were a great team. I'll give you a little prompt for one. You took Mom to a ball game.
Oh yeah.
And what did she do at halftime?
No, we went to a Phillies game. This is when we were, I think, I thought it was when we were dating. But it was something that is rare, I guess now. It was a doubleheader, and it was. I guess we were dating. It was in September, and it was at the time when the Phillies had a good team. They had Robin Roberts and another guy, Kurt something, I think, were the pitchers, and we were at the end of September, and they were playing for a position to get into the playoffs or whatever they were in 1953. So anyway, I think somebody gave me tickets at work. So we went to this game. Your mom, reluctantly, she didn't like sports, and so we went to this game, and at the seventh inning stretch, for you that knew baseball in those days, you would get up and stretch out and get done. Well, your mother thought that was the end of the game. And so
Time to go home.
I said, no, we got 2 more innings to go. And so we left at the end of the 9th inning. I didn't have the heart to tell her there was another whole 9 innings, or maybe the courage, I don't know which. And
That's funny.
um,
She wasn't big on baseball, that's for sure.
or so, I don't know of any sports that enticed her.
My mom liked her soap, so
Oh yeah.
yeah.
And there's some of them are still running.
Yeah, they're not losing popularity.
Yeah. So yeah,
All right. Well, that was a good one, Dad. Thank you.
you're welcome.
All right.